Well, we'll be begging for this kind of content in the off season when there's not near the amount of stuff that we can talk about. There's all the on-the-field stuff, obviously, with the college football games that happen every single Saturday. But here, we have so much drama off the field with the coaching carousel, for example, which is absolutely on fire. There are some huge, I'll say stipulations, huge ramifications even, that are going to take place this Saturday that directly tie into the coaching carousel. You've got, speaking of messes, this Brian Kelly situation that continues to develop, that continues to get uglier and uglier, and will continue to get as ugly as possible as time goes on. We're going to pray for like content like this here in just a few months, but we're basking in it now. We're letting it soak in. We're talking about it. We're going to take it day by day here. And that's just what we're going to do right here on College Football. Y'all, I want to thank you so much for listening, for watching. My name's Brendan Taylor. And before I get into all that college football mess, teaser, the Brian Kelly stuff is one thing, but the other thing, to do with one coach, one sought-after coach, two fan bases. One fan base is absolutely on edge. Another fan base that is lusting after said coach. Those teams are meeting each other on the gridiron this Saturday. Should be entertaining. We'll talk about that at the end of the show, but I feel like since we're into the second iteration of the college football playoff rankings, I should go ahead and probably talk about that because that's pretty important. Is it really important? Because we have this week, and we have 2 more weeks of the regular season, and then championship week. So, do these rankings matter? It matters in such a way as the recency bias that we see year in and year out, regardless of what stipulations they have, regardless of what metrics they use, regardless if it's a 4-team playoff, a 12-team playoff, a 64-team playoff. There's this variation every year, some variation of this with teams that looked ugly at the beginning of the season, but they look good now. And you have teams that look good at the beginning of the season that have slipped up. And some of that is due to in-conference play, teams beating up on each other, such as what happens in the SEC and what's really been happening in the ACC this season. But if I take a look at these rankings that just came out on Tuesday, the second iteration of these rankings, and there's a whole other story to do with the College Football Playoff Committee and the chair. I won't talk about that tonight. That will be for another day. That's a pretty ugly story. But look it up. College football chairman, Baylor, the athletic director from Baylor, stepping down as the committee chair. Some ugly stuff there. Look that up if you want to see that, because that is a wild story. Just don't have time to talk about that now. But what I will talk about is Ohio State and Indiana standing firm at the number 1 and number 2 positions. And honestly, Texas A&M at 3. I think we could have predicted that, it was probably going to stay the same. Because at this point, until one of these 3 teams loses, I don't see how you can, maybe change this up any. I get it, like Texas A&M. You may think, well, they should be number 1. They're in the SEC. They face tougher competition than Ohio State and Indiana does. I will say, because, look, I know the name of this podcast is College Football Y'all. I'm based in the southeastern United States, so I should be a little bit biased towards the SEC, and I am, in a way. But I will be honest and try to be neutral when we're talking about other teams, Big Ten teams, and we talk about ACC teams here in a minute. I'll be neutral for them as well. I absolutely love the Big 12. Talk about Texas Tech here in just a minute too, but when we're dealing with Ohio State and when we're dealing with Indiana, at this point, Ohio State, I think, has earned their spot at number 1. Because, you can't always look at okay, they won the national title last year, so they should be number one. No, I don't believe that last year's results equal to success now. Ohio State deserves the number one spot. Now, you can have an argument all day long until the rooster crows in the morning about strength of schedule, strength of record. Sometimes you have to take the eye test too. It's not just about the metrics. It's not just about the analytics. It's not just about who the teams play. Sometimes you have to look at the team themselves. And I think that's what, for the most part, maybe the committee's doing. They're saying that Ohio State has an incredible team. And Ryan Day is probably, he's going to go undefeated in the regular season here. And I know that they're not forecasting. I believe that they're taking it week by week, and they're not looking ahead of what will happen. They're looking at what the here and now is. And that is what makes this committee different than, say, odds makers. If you say, well, why don't you just let Vegas do the playoff rankings? Why don't you let the people, the bookies, and all those people that are absolute experts at what they do and are incredible? And it's amazing how close they get on a lot of these metrics, on a lot of these lines, these spreads. If you've ever played Underdog or one of those fantasy apps where you bet the over-under on like passing yards for a quarterback or rushing yards, and you realize just how close they get. And it's mind-boggling how close these statistics get to the line that they set out. Same thing when it comes to spreads on games and over-under points totals and such. The only problem with letting Vegas do this versus letting a team of people do it is Vegas is looking ahead, and they're looking at what a team could be, what a team might possibly be, not what a team is. Vegas is looking at the analytics. The people in the committee are looking at the team themselves. The individual players, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. What they've done, who they play, how did they play against this team? They had a loss. Was it a good loss? Was it a bad loss? The team that they lost to, did they fall off the cliff, or are they title contenders as well? All those things factor in. So, yes, I mean, it's fun to entertain the bookies and Vegas and all those kinds of people, those entities, possibly, getting their hand in the cookie jar of the rankings. I don't think that's in the best interest. Some people think the BCS model still works. Some people think that there should be a BCS model in there. But honestly, if you want to do some homework, seek out the BCS, the hypothetical BCS rankings. You can find them out there on Twitter or X. You can probably search them on Google or whatever. And there are people out there that use the computer metrics like what they used to use back in the BCS era. And week by week, they put out these people, whoever these people are, they put out the rankings, what they would be if it was the BCS. And honestly, it's pretty darn close. It's pretty darn close here. So you can't really argue, it's everything is kind of what it should be. And it's better than the AP poll. It's better than the coaches poll. Now, Indiana had a scare this weekend. You all saw it, the viral moment with the catch to save the game at the end of, up there at Penn State. Incredible. And you say, well, okay, James Franklin's gone. They have an interim coach, and you almost lose to them, and you're supposed to be the number 2 team in the country. I see it as, regardless of all that, you still had to go play in a tough environment up there in State College. Ruckus crowd. Regardless if it was a day game or if it was a night game, it's hard to play up there. And you found a way to win. And Kirk Cignetti, he's an incredible coach, and he deserves every bit of praise that he gets. His contract extension, all those things. Fantastic coach. His team deserves credit for keeping themselves in there. I don't think this Indiana team is what, like a team like Indiana was a year or two ago. What other teams like a TCU, for example, back just a few years back, and a Cincinnati, some other teams that, tried to get into the conversation, that were put into the conversation, that had seasons like Indiana has had, but when the rubber met the road, they got pummeled. And I don't know what's going to happen in the Big Ten, between Ohio State and Indiana. I do know that they're going to meet in the Big Ten championship game. Let's see who. So we know Ohio State. If I pull up their schedule here, obviously there's you could call it a bump in the road when they go to play Michigan. Ryan Day, Michigan, it's like oil and water. They don't mix. I don't see a scenario where Ohio State has a single issue with Michigan this year. Now, you could have said that in any number of years. Michigan's 18th. It's going to be at Michigan. In front of up 110 plus. I don't think it matters. I think they have a good top 25 win versus Michigan. They move on to the Big Ten title game, and they play Indiana. And that's where you're going to see kind of, they're going to battle for number one. Oh, obviously, because both teams are going to go into the championship game undefeated, it doesn't really matter. Whoever loses may not even fall out of the top 4. 5, 6 at the absolute lowest. But man, can you imagine if Indiana beats Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game up there in Indianapolis? I mean, what will be the talk about Indiana? Then you have Texas A&M there, and you have this 3-team stretch of SEC teams, and Texas A&M at 3, Alabama at 4, and Georgia at 5. Alabama obviously above Georgia because they beat Georgia. They lost to Florida State at the beginning of the year. That's kind of the thing that we were talking about a minute ago. With a team loses at the beginning of the season, they're able to redeem themselves. But for Alabama, they've played lights out. They've found a way to get through every game, overcome adversity. They beat Georgia. They're right on the heels of Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M, and I've got it right here. Texas A&M, the team that's in their way is Texas. And that's one of those weird, in-state things, in-state rivalries. If you remember Texas A&M, really, 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 really against Texas entering the SEC. They're the ones that voted against Texas entering the SEC. Now, I understand that because when Texas A&M came into the SEC, they had the impression that they were going to be the Texas team and they were going to be the only Texas team for all eternity, and that obviously didn't take place. And not only that, Texas came into the league and absolutely outshined them immediately. And, I mean, Texas A&M is, they're building themselves back up. But, man, Texas just made Texas A&M look like fools last season. That's the test. Can Arch Manning and the Texas Longhorns whoop up on old Texas A&M? I don't know. But the thing about that is, what does that do for Texas? It doesn't do anything. If anything, it hurts Texas A&M. It really doesn't help Texas any because they have to go to Georgia before they play A&M. Texas is already at 7-2. They're right there. If you watched ESPN on Tuesday, if you're not a YouTube TV subscriber, that is, or if you were able to, like myself, but if you were able to get to watch it by other means, and I won't say what those other means are, then you would have saw their hypothetical, the seeding based on the rankings, and it's fun to look at. It's fun to see all that, and it's fun to watch. Like, hypothetically, if the playoffs started this week, these are the teams that would play, and these would be the host sites, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to entertain it that much because it's just teasing. I would rather look at the rankings themselves than to look at that stuff right there. But if you watched that program, you saw that Texas was sitting right there at number 10, which would be the last at large. Because unlike last season, the ACC isn't looking too well. So 11 and 12 is taken up by conference champions. So Texas right there on the bubble at 7 and 2. I don't see a avenue where they get 2 wins here. If they do, that would be a heck of a turnaround. A heck of a performance. Talking about Heisman level performance by Arch Manning. At Georgia, though. Sanford Stadium. And then at home. Believe it, at home versus A&M. So Texas goes in there. They're three losses, and then they beat Texas A&M. Well, is that a good win for a good loss for Texas A&M? What does that do for them? And what does that do for the SEC race? I don't even want to talk about the SEC race. And honestly, Georgia, they have found a way to win. They found a way to win against Ole Miss. Yes, they did lose to Alabama, but that is a team that's still hot, kind of flying slightly under the radar, but they're still there. Honestly, Ole Miss is in the best spot. We'll get to the bump in the road after we talk about the rankings. Florida, and then your in-state rival, Mississippi State, down in Starkville to end the season. The Rebels have the greatest chance of going 11-1 than they did last year. Last year, they dropped the ball early in the season. Ole Miss, they did well enough early in the year, beat LSU, got through that Kentucky game, got through Arkansas. Shaky here and there, but that's part of it, right? You managed to, because of good coaching, because of great scouting, your number one guy gets hurt, and then your D2 transfer, Trinidad Chambliss, comes in, and he is an absolute stud. And thank God for him, because Ole Miss is sitting pretty right now because of that. Because you were allowed to lose that Georgia game and still be in a absolute perfect position. Because you got it done on the road in Norman, Oklahoma. You got it done at home versus South Carolina. You got to take a break versus the Citadel. You got Florida. You got that dreaded bye week. And then you got Mississippi State. Rebels are in the absolute best position, I think, to make the playoff. And they're sitting pretty. If they just hold what they've got, I don't think any scenario is going to bump them out of a host spot. I think they're good. Texas Tech, Big 12. Now, I should have listened to some when we're talking about Texas Tech here, because for some reason, I thought that Arizona State would be just as good without Cam Scatterbo, that they would somehow figure it out, and somehow they would make it back to the Big 12 championship game, and they would face Utah for the Big 12 title. Boy, was I wrong. Now, Utah's sitting there at number 13 in the rankings. They're not bad. They're 7-2 right now. Arizona State, no, not happening. I was wrong. I should have bought the Texas Tech stock like some did, because they foresaw something that I didn't. Texas Tech is absolutely hot. Let's see what their road looks like. So they just came off of that pretty good win against BYU, knocked BYU down a notch. So Texas Tech, upcoming, they've got UCF and they've got West Virginia. So they're a shoe-in. They'll probably say the same. And I understand they bumped Ole Miss down a spot. I can understand if we look at the metrics like we talked about earlier. The metrics on, yes, Ole Miss may have a tougher schedule. This metric, that metric, these statistics, those statistics. That all may be true on paper. But the optics of Texas Tech, how Texas Tech handled BYU, and like they handled Utah, for example. Who else? I mean, that's about it. They've got a weak schedule, but that falls into the kind of you've done this for me lately kind of thing. Meanwhile, Ole Miss is playing the Citadel, and I think that they punished Ole Miss for that. But Texas Tech, I've heard people say, well, like just like Indiana, when Texas Tech gets in there, gets into the playoff, they're going to be humbled. Texas Tech, man, they may go further into the playoff than even Indiana does. That is a good football team. And then Oregon, who has kind of slipped a little bit, still sitting pretty there at 8-1. Notre Dame, why would they ever want to join a conference? They're 7-2. They're number 9. They're going to make it to the playoff. I don't see a scenario where they don't. Let's see Notre Dame's schedule. See who they have left. I should know this stuff off the top of my head, but I don't. So they've got how could I forget? College game day in Pittsburgh this Saturday. Wonder what the line is on that game. So after that, if they get through that game, you got Syracuse and you got Stanford. So Notre Dame, if they can get past Pittsburgh, a number 22 ranked Pittsburgh team, then they'll be in the playoff. Notre Dame should never join a conference. Why? Why would you do that? You're only handicapping yourself if you do that. And I understand. And then you got Texas, like we said, at 10. Oklahoma, they're at 11. BYU at 12. Obviously, the 11 and 12 spot, not going to make it because Miami at 15. Miami as the, what on paper here is the highest ranked conference team for the ACC. So, as of this week, Miami would get one of those spots. And also, who was the other one? South Florida. South Florida at 24 would also get the G6 bid. So that's all going to change. I understand the seeding and I understand the why you want to try to include the G6 team. But, I want everybody to be included. And is there a scenario where a G6 team is going to ever win the national championship? Probably not. Will they ever make it to a semifinal? Probably not. Give them a shot. But what is funny about this is the teams that get the bye weeks still seem to be punished because they get tough draws. Yeah, they get a bye week. They get a week off. They get to watch everybody else beat up on each other. But man, they've got to play the team that come out of the rubble. So we saw what that did last season. All the teams that had byes lost. Is that going to be a repeat this season? I don't know. But I do know that the ACC, much like the SEC, has been absolutely beating up on each other. What are the ACC standings? So, a lot of things that I have predicted have been wrong. And that's okay. I thought Clemson was going to be a lot better than they have been. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Extremely wrong. I saw Miami as a fringe college football playoff team. That could still happen. I'm crossing my fingers. I thought it would be Miami and Clemson in the ACC title game with Clemson winning. Cade Klubnik failed me. Dabo Swinney, his inability to recruit the portal and get deep into the NIL stuff, he failed me. Carson Beck failed me in Miami. Right now, you got Georgia Tech at the top of the ACC. Meanwhile, right under them is Virginia, Pittsburgh, SMU. And Georgia Tech, currently the only team with one loss. Man. I heard Josh Pate say this the other day, like, is it possible that the ACC gets 0 bids in the college football playoff? I don't think it'll happen. But my goodness, could you imagine that? Not really anything else of note in the playoffs. Now, this is going to change many more times. Does it matter? It's fun to talk about. From now on, next week, and the next week, the next week, they'll all, like I like to say, they build upon each other. The first week of the playoff, they set the groundwork. And then it's just moving the pieces slightly from there. So, that's that. My bracket that I created before the season, it's not looking so good. Oh, yeah, before I move on, I do want to talk about Georgia. I kind of skipped right over Georgia. They've got, like I said, Texas, but they also have Georgia Tech. And if you remember, Georgia Tech had a barn burner with Georgia, a 9 fake overtime game where Georgia Tech won the game, but they didn't. They lost, but in my heart, they won. Trap game for the Georgia Bulldogs last week of the season. Be on the lookout for that one. But enough about that on the field stuff. Enough about that college football playoff mumbo jumbo. Let's get into some drama. Let's get into into the weeds with this college football coaching carousel 2025-2026. So, if you know, Brian Kelly was let go as a head coach for the LSU Tigers. And big buyout was like $54 million, right? And then LSU came out and said, you know what? We really don't want to pay that. Oh, would you take, I don't know, $25 million? $30 million? And Brian Kelly very rightfully said, absolutely freaking not. You're going to give me my money, my $54 million. I will take it however you can give it. So LSU is going to pull the card where, they really don't want to pay the money. Brian Kelly has turned down the lump sum settlements of $25 million and then another one for $30 million. He's not going to budge, and he shouldn't. So because of that, LSU is going to try to weasel their way out of this any way they can. Because if you can't force someone down, can't force a negotiation, then you're going to cut their legs off right at the knees. Now let's use, they're going to pretend that he was fired with cause. Like there's a lot of coaches' contracts have morality clauses in them, things like that. Maybe LSU's going to try to drum up some dirt, stir up some dirt on Brian Kelly. Is there dirt out there? I don't know. But as it says right here in this article, Brian Kelly's suing for over $54 million buyout. And, as I'm reading this, he's expecting fully liquidated damages to be paid. And this is going to get uglier and uglier. I'm just telling you that right now, folks. So Kelly's filing disputes LSU's positions and quotes his representative stating he disagreed that he hadn't been terminated, that Woodward lacked authority, and that, quote, there were any grounds for termination with cause. Okay. The petition says LSU representatives told Kelly's side Monday that he had not been formally terminated and that the school was considering firing him for cause. Fire him for cause. Okay. Wasting really good talent. Wasting top recruiting classes. Coaching malpractice. No defense showing up on Saturdays. Fan base screaming at the top of their lungs, fire Brian Kelly. Asking Brian Kelly to leave. Scram. Don't come back. We'll pack all your stuff in a box. We'll mail it to you. We'll ship it to you. We'll have some intern bring it to your house or whatever. So you had the deal with the AD. Then you had the governor of Louisiana stepping in and saying, oh, he's not going to make a decision, and putting his foot in his mouth with the comments that he made. And now you have this. This is all enough to turn off any prospective coach out there that's looking to take a huge step up, whether it's a current SEC coach or a coach in another conference looking to move up to the SEC level. This is embarrassing. I've heard rumors about what Kelly may have done, certain things that, dirt out there, but, the internet it's completely unreliable, especially idiots on Twitter that post things. But that continues to get ugly, continues to get uglier and uglier as time goes on. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I feel like this is going to be something that's going to be ongoing. And I'll give updates and my opinions as time goes on. But it is really kind of funny. But finally, we move on. From Brian Kelly, move on from the college football playoff discussion to the main event. I don't hear a drum roll. Regardless. It's the Lane Kiffin fiasco is what I'm calling it. So, if you haven't been living under a rock, then you know about all this. But if you have happened to, much like Patrick Star on SpongeBob SquarePants, if you've been living under a rock, then you would know that Lane Kiffin, per usual, just like every season he's been at Ole Miss, he is up for a coaching job. And some years there's been coaching jobs that just, you're not going to get him. There was the deal with Auburn a few years ago where he was about to go. We all know that story, all heard that story. That's in the past. That's done. There was always sort of an inkling that, he might would go to Florida. He's a Florida guy, loves Florida. He's always down there fishing in the ocean. He used to have a house down there at Boca Raton, coach down there at Boca Raton for Florida Atlantic there for a few years, few seasons. He loves it down there. He spends a lot of time in the offseason in Florida. On his boat, whatever, on a boat. But you've also heard things like, well, he'll take over for Nick Saban. Well, he didn't do that. Now, if Kalen DeBoer gets fired here in a few years, that job will be open again, following in the footsteps of Nick Saban. But there's also the thought that, well, maybe he goes to the NFL, goes back to the NFL. He coached the Raiders back in the day, like 20 years ago. Maybe he goes back to the NFL. Okay. It's a little bit different. When you go, to a completely different league like that, it's a little bit different than if you're going to another team in conference. Billy Napier was fired on October 19th. And it's been just under a month. There's been speculation of this all season. It goes back to last season. No, Florida didn't pull the trigger on releasing Napier then. Okay? Just like I bet. Just like I predicted. This season, I think we all could have assumed and may have almost put money on it. I certainly wouldn't have, but you could have put money on Billy Napier getting fired this season. Probably not making it to the end of the year. Well, that did come to pass. So, yes, there was already a flame all season. When Napier was fired, poured 1 million gallons of gas on that flame, and now you have the Lane Kiffin fiasco. And this Saturday, you have the Lane Kiffin Bowl, as people are coining it, where Florida comes to Oxford. Ole Miss is favored by 13.5 points. I mean, there's a lot of Florida players that are out. I think a lot of them are just opting out of the game. Ole Miss is pretty healthy. There's a lot that they can do in this game. And there certainly are people that are talking about the game itself. I think Ole Miss is, if I would say they don't cover that 13.5 spread, but I think they do win by 10, maybe 13. A little bit closer game. So I don't think they cover the spread, but I still do think they win the game. But here's the thing. So, if you've been on Twitter like I have, whether you're a fan of one of these teams or if you're just a college football fan out there looking in, that this has all been extremely entertaining. Regardless of who you are, okay? Now today, Thursday, as I'm recording this, November 13th, the Ole Miss message boards were set on fire by, we'll just say, a Rebels 247 message board. I won't go into depth with any names or anything. Basically talking about, well, Kiffin and, Florida's been talking and there's this and there's that. And, it's the possibility is greater than it was before. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. Well, Ole Miss Twitter set ablaze today. Fanbase is absolutely just they're down bad, and I can understand that. Don't look at any of this stuff behind me on these walls. When I'm on this podcast, I'm absolutely completely neutral. I have no fandom towards any team when I'm speaking into this microphone. But man, it's funny. And just to see the discourse, the disdain, and the fighting between these two fan bases, of this Ole Miss fan base and this Florida fan base, has been pretty entertaining. And yes, you've got LSU because they thought they had some skin in the game, but they stick their nose in everything, and it kind of muddies it all up. And I think they're kind of enjoying themselves as well, because I think maybe they have their eyes on maybe some other candidates. They're shooting for the stars like Nick Saban, which is not going to happen, but it's fun to dream. I dreamed earlier. I was sitting there and I was looking up and imagining if I had like $1 billion, what I would have. And honestly, if I had $1 billion, college football would never be the same because of what I would do with my $1 billion. So what's my point in all this? Well, there's going to be a lot of information, as there has been. There's going to be a lot of misinformation. But look at me in the eyes and listen closely. If you're an Ole Miss fan and you're looking at Lane Kiffin and you're looking at these message boards and you're looking at what, these other schlubs from Florida that are crap posting on social media to try to get a rise out of you, do not let them succeed. Keep your screenshots, bookmark posts, screenshots. Keep receipts. That is my advice to you. You are the only one that has something to lose. Florida fans, all of you on Twitter that are, like adding fuel to the flame, you have nothing to lose. You're at the very bottom. You have been through 4 coaches and had no success. Okay? You are at the bottom of the barrel. You're hoping and praying that Lane Kiffin shows up to Gainesville. Okay? And if he doesn't, I know, look, he's option 1, option 2, option 3, option 4. But there are other people out there. Okay? You're not the number 1 job. That's LSU. You're better than Auburn. And you're fighting for the number 2 spot between you and Penn State. Although, I will say that the kind of coach that would take the Penn State job and the kind of coach that would take the Florida job are probably 9 times out of 10 going to be 2 different kinds of people. The only one out of those 10 would be somebody like James Franklin that has coached in the SEC before. Hey, anything's possible. He can end up in Gainesville. You never know. But you got a really good job. Okay? Like I said, number 2 between you and Penn State. Like a 2A, 2B. Because, let's face it. The kind of, like I said, like Brian Kelly at LSU, he doesn't fit down here. He needs to stay up there. Same thing with the Penn State job, Florida job. If you're from up there, you need to stay up there. If you're from down here, you probably need to stay down here. There are outliers. Yes, I know Nick Saban is not from the South. I understand that. That's okay. That's okay. Ole Miss fans, this is what I would say to you also. I know you're going to hate Lane Kiffin if he leaves. I know you're going to have disdain for Lane Kiffin if he leaves. I know somebody's going to burn a mattress in his front yard. Burn a cow in his driveway. Maybe worse. You saw what happened at Tennessee when he left Tennessee in the middle of the night. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, oh, Lane Kiffin, he is not the kind of guy that he used to be. He's no different than he used to be, excuse me. That Lane Kiffin, he's just like when he was at Tennessee. He was just like when he left them in the middle of the night. That ESPN documentary, that E60 that he did just a couple months ago, it was all lies. Lies. He is not a changed person. Everything he says is a lie. He was just using us to get to the next job. And you're all going to say that, and you're all going to believe that. But this is what you have to remember. Regardless of what happens, Lane Kiffin came to Oxford, and he expected for this to be a step. He expected this just to be a doorstep to get to something greater. But what he didn't expect was what Oxford would be to him, what the community would be to him, for what Mississippi would be to him. Those things aren't lies. You can't lie about that stuff. You can't make that stuff up. You can't pretend that those things aren't true because you see it out of him. And you have to believe it. The way he carries himself. He has his family here. He is not the same kind of guy that the national media, a lot of them idiots, still try to paint a certain picture of him as if he's the same guy he was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it's just not true. So if he does leave, and if his family decides that, you know what, yeah, this is the best thing for all of us, maybe, to go down here and try to see what we can do in this world down there in Gainesville, then, like, you have to be comfortable in that because he made his mark on Oxford. He made his mark on Ole Miss. You made your mark on him. You changed his life. I think he will always be grateful for Oxford, always be grateful for Ole Miss. And like I said, if he does leave, whatever happens down there is going to happen. You know, it's going to be tough. It's not an easier job. You never know. In 3 or 4 years, if he's winning a national title or if he's fired down there in Florida. What I will say is, be grateful for him. Because he would have left on way, way, way better terms than Hugh Freeze did. Because he's leaving your program in an incredible spot. Because, believe me, Keith Carter, Glenn Boyce, the Ole Miss administration, the Ole Miss athletic department, they can afford to pay anybody and everybody. Okay. You'll find another coach. If he leaves, you'll find another coach. Everything's going to be all right. It may be a little bit bumpy for a year or two. Lane Kiffin elevated that program, brought it up out of the depths, brought it up out of, the shambles that Hugh Freeze left it in, and then Matt Luke proceeded to, pace back and forth on top of. You Ole Miss fans, you'll get that joke. But he comes in there and he really made a difference. And I think you should appreciate that. The other part of that is, if Lane Kiffin does stay, and I still lean slightly that he does, maybe 60-40 at this point. I went from 95 down to 70, now I'm at 60. We'll say 60-40. 60% chance that he stays. He will be a legend in Oxford. He will have statues. You never know. He could win a national title at Ole Miss. I mean, anything can happen in this era. They're going to be competing for a championship this season in a down year. What does that tell you? They can do it. You can do it at Ole Miss. He's proven that. He will be a legend if he stays. If he gives Ole Miss just a few more years. Do I expect him to retire at Ole Miss? Absolutely not. He's 50 years old. He's got a lot of coaching left in him. He could leave for Alabama. He could leave for the NFL. I don't know where he'll go if he doesn't. If he stays at Ole Miss now, I don't know where he will go in the future. I have no clue. But my goodness, what he could be in the over 100-year history of Ole Miss athletics, the over 100-year history of Ole Miss football, what he could be, man, it would be sweet. And I think that's what hurts people more than if he left when, the Auburn fiasco happened a few years ago. I think it would hurt more now because you know that he's done so much good things. Getting us to the playoff, all those things, all of that stuff together. It's us. We can do this in Mississippi. Everything, the stereotypes that everybody said about Mississippi, about Ole Miss, about, in a state like this, you could say the same thing about other states like Arkansas that are kind of low on the totem pole, if we say. but proving that, man, it could be done. We can come together and do something great. And we have people that can give money. We have donors that can contribute to, a lot of money to NIL. We can have a big NIL program. We can win a lot of games. We can be legendary. And I think that's what's going to hurt Ole Miss people the most. Just the fact that there's such a great thing going on, and it can only get better as time goes on. That is what would hurt the most. And we'll see. It's a very fluid situation. Lane Kiffin Bowl this Saturday should be absolutely ruckus in Oxford. It'll be packed. I've already saw there are already here in the middle of the week, there are already people, Florida fans in Oxford. I anticipate some rowdiness will be going on. Maybe even some altercations. And possibly in the game as well. I don't know if the players really care as much as the fans do, because I think they're all professionals. And that's kind of the thing that the NIL era has given us. It has given us professional college athletes. And they mean business. And Ole Miss, giving them all the credit, the Ole Miss players have not been affected by this, and I don't think they'll be affected by this week. If anything, they'll want to play harder to make a statement. But obviously, Florida fans, looking for their perspective, they want to come in here and they want to win this game, because if you knock Ole Miss out of playoff contention, then the chances of you getting Kiffin are a lot greater. Because if you're Florida, and you don't want Ole Miss to go to the playoff, because you want to get the deal done with Kiffin, and sooner the better, like the week after the Egg Bowl. Because if he goes to the playoff, he's going to go to the playoff. He's going to be tied up till January, probably. And regardless of what some idiots on X have said, absolutely no way he's going to accept a job when his team is on their way to the playoff. He's not going to accept another job. No, that is like Bush League kind of stuff. And no athletic director, at least in the Power 5, the Power 4, is going to put up with that. If a coach accepts another job and his team is about to go to the playoff, you're not coaching a playoff game, buddy. Remember when, now this isn't, obviously this is, because we're talking about an assistant coach here. 2016, it was 2015, I believe it was. 2015, 2016. At Alabama. Alabama was going to the national title game. Lane Kiffin had just accepted a job to coach at Florida Atlantic. Nick Saban asked Kiffin to leave the program, and that's obvious, because at that point your mind is set on your new job, that he doesn't want that to be a distraction. If you're sitting there and you are going to another team in your own conference, undermining, just cutting the legs off of your team after all you've done for him, I don't see Kiffin doing that. He's not that kind of guy. I truly don't believe he's that kind of guy. So even entertaining a possibility of that happening is just silly. It'd be fun to see. It's going to be fun to watch. If you're on the outside looking in, man, get on Twitter, get into this mess, because honestly, it's entertaining as heck. And it is sad that this is what we're talking about over the actual games, but it's just such a fluid situation. And, Ole Miss could be in a bind. Like I said, they're going to be fine. They're going to be able to pay to get a good coach. The only problem is if Kiffin leaves, you're already going to be behind the 8 ball. But Florida, are they going to want to wait around? If they don't definitively know if Kiffin's going to go, will they wait around? And what if they're wrong? Regardless, there's winners and losers, but we all know that the biggest winner in all this is the agent, Jimmy Sexton, and there's got to be some kind of conflict of interest there. I wouldn't doubt that something has to fall under some kind of antitrust violation. I mean, you're dealing with state-funded universities. You're dealing with all these different coaches. It's a mess. I'm telling you, he's where it's at because all the big-time coaches have him as their agent, and there's nothing you and I can do about it. It's going to be another great weekend of college football. We'll see what happens. Man, it's so exciting. I love football. As we're winding it down, we've got this week and then 2 more weeks left in the regular season. But do not fear, because I had heard something the other day that we're as far from the beginning of the season as we are to the national title game. So there's still a lot of time left. There's just not a whole lot of games left for our favorite teams. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of College Football, y'all. My name is Brandon Taylor. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in the next one. Follow me on all the socials and like and subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. Until next time, have a good one. Peace.